The window of my office overlooks the valley where Northwood sleeps beneath its blanket of snow. Winter 2024 is mild, almost apologetic. Nothing like the winter of 1982, the winter that made me who I am. My grandson Michael sits across from me, 17 years old, and full of questions he doesn't know how to ask. On my desk between us lies an iron key heavy and dark with age. The same key that was pressed into my palm 42 years ago by a caseworker who didn't meet my eyes when she told me I was on my own. Grandpa, Michael says, turning the key over in his hands, how did you keep this place when you were only 18? I look at him, seeing myself at that age. Angry, lost, certain the world owed me something. I was wrong about that last part. The world doesn't owe anyone anything. But sometimes, if you're willing to bleed for it, the world lets you earn what you need. The story I'm about to tell you, I say, isn't about luck. It's about the winter a boy had to become a man because there was no one else to do it. It's about a choice your great-grandmother left me. And it's about learning that home isn't something you're given. It's something you build even when you don't know how. Michael sets the key down carefully like it might break. He doesn't know yet that some things, the important things, are stronger than they look. It started, I tell him, on the day I turned 18. The air outside the Greyhound station in Portland tasted like diesel and coming snow. November 15th, 1982. 4 days past my 18th birthday, and the world had already made it clear what that meant. No more foster care. No more system. No more pretending anyone was responsible for me except myself. I stood on the cracked pavement with everything I owned in a surplus military backpack that smelled like the group home's industrial detergent. In my right hand, I held that iron key. In my left, a bus ticket to a town I'd never heard of, and a piece of paper with an address written in the careful handwriting of a social worker who'd already moved on to the next case. 4 days earlier on my birthday, I'd learned what it felt like to have your jaw broken by a man who was supposed to keep you safe. Dale Miller, my foster father, for the last 8 months, was a Vietnam veteran who'd brought the war home with him in a bottle. When I asked to call my sister, something in him snapped. His fist caught me below the ear, and I went down on the kitchen linoleum, seeing stars that had nothing to do with birthday wishes. The police came. They took statements. They saw a troubled 18-year-old with a history of moving from home to home, and they saw a decorated veteran who served his country. By the time the sun set on my birthday, I was the one being removed. Not for my protection, for his. Ms. Patricia Albright. My caseworker had that look they all got. The one that said she cared but not enough to actually do anything. She met me in the hallway of the group home where they'd placed me temporarily, her arms full of folders that represented other lives, other failures. Nathan, she said, and her voice had the practiced softness of someone who delivered bad news for a living. You're 18 now. Legally, we don't have any obligation. The Millers won't take you back, and honestly, given the incident, I think that's for the best. The incident, that's what she called it when a grown man broke a kid's face. They had words for everything except the truth. But your grandmother, she continued, reaching into her bag. Margaret Pierce, she passed away 3 months ago. According to records, she left you something. She placed the key in my hand first. Heavy, iron, old enough to have stories, then the paper with the address, then the bus ticket. It's a property in Northwood, Maine, up north. The records say it was condemned years ago. There probably isn't much there, Nathan. Maybe just land, but it's yours. It's all she left. I looked at the key, feeling its weight. A condemned house in a town I'd never heard of. My inheritance from a grandmother I'd never met, who'd never once visited in 10 years of foster care. It felt like a final insult from a family that had already abandoned me. There's a bus that leaves in an hour, Miss Albright said. It's the best I can do. The best she could do was a one-way ticket to nothing. I didn't thank her. The words wouldn't come. I just took my backpack and walked out of that building, away from the only life I'd known, such as it was. I didn't look back. Looking back was something I couldn't afford. But standing there at the bus station with the November wind cutting through my thin jacket, all I could think about was Emma, my sister, 10 years old, stuck in the system 2 towns over with a family called the Gables. We'd been separated 3 years ago when her previous placement fell through. They told me I couldn't see her anymore. Bad influence, they said. Unstable. The thought of her small and fierce and alone made the cold in my bones feel even deeper. I'd promised her once years ago when they first split us up that I would never leave her. It was a stupid promise, a child's promise, but it lived in me like a stone, heavy and unmovable. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a cheap pay-as-you-go brick I'd bought with money from doing yard work. The screen showed a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. "Hello, Nathan." The voice was tiny, choked with tears. "Nathan, is that you?" Time stopped. "Emma, how did you get this number? Are you okay?" I could hear her trying not to cry, the hitching breaths of someone fighting to keep it together. "I heard them talking. Mrs. Gable was on the phone with Miss Albright. They said you were gone. They said they're moving me to Oregon, to a family, a permanent one." The word permanent hung in the cold air like a death sentence. Permanent meant forever. Permanent meant I would never see her again. "They're taking me away forever, Nathan." I leaned against the brick wall of the station, the rough surface digging into my back through my jacket. My mind went blank, filled with white noise and panic. I forced myself to breathe, to think. "Where are you right now?" "I'm at the library. I told Mrs. Gable I had a school project. I used the computer to look up the bus station number." I ran, Nathan. I ran away. She ran. My 10-year-old sister, who was afraid of the dark and thunderstorms, had run away to find me. The weight in my chest shifted from despair to something sharper, more focused. A terrible clarity. "Don't move," I said, and the words came out with a certainty I didn't feel. "Stay right there. I'm coming to get you." I didn't know how. The library was on the other side of Portland. I had $12 and a bus ticket to nowhere. But none of that mattered. All that mattered was the small, frightened voice on the other end of the line. I used the last of my money to get a taxi to the library. Found Emma huddled in the children's section, clutching a worn teddy bear, her eyes red from crying. When she saw me, she ran into my arms, and I held her like she was the only thing keeping me from flying apart. We couldn't go back. That much was clear. Going back meant they'd separate us for good. So we ran. We spent that night in a 24-hour laundromat, Emma asleep on my lap in a plastic chair, my arm around her, watching the fluorescent lights flicker and trying to figure out what the hell we were going to do. That's when I remembered the envelope. It had come to the group home a week before my birthday, forwarded from some central records office. I'd shoved it in my backpack and forgotten about it, afraid it was just one more door slamming shut. In the harsh light of the laundromat, with the washers rumbling their white noise symphony, I opened it. Official letterhead, Kalen County Tax Assessor's Office. The language was dense with legal jargon, but the message was brutally clear. The property listed under the name Eleanor Margaret Pierce was delinquent on property taxes. The total amount due, including penalties and interest accrued over 15 years, was $6,428. If the amount was not paid in full, within 60 days of the date of this notice, the county would seize the property and sell it at public auction. A preliminary bid had already been accepted from a corporation called Blackwood Development, $15,000. The letter was dated 3 weeks ago. We didn't have 60 days. We had 28. I read the number again. $6,428. It might as well have been $1 million. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it back in the envelope, as if hiding it could make it less real. Emma stirred in her sleep, murmuring something I couldn't hear. I looked down at her, this small person who trusted me completely, who'd run away from safety because she believed I would keep her safe. The weight of that trust was crushing, but it was also clarifying. We had nowhere to go. No family, no money, no options except one. A condemned house in a town called Northwood, a house that was already being sold out from under us. A house that probably wasn't even standing anymore. But it was an address, it was a destination, and it was the only thing in the world that was technically legally ours. In the morning before the sun had fully risen, I bought 2 tickets on a different bus line, one that made a dozen stops in towns with names like they'd been forgotten by history. It took the last of my money except for $4.50. Emma didn't ask where we were going. She just held my hand and trusted me. That trust was heavier than the backpack. The bus pulled out of Portland as the city's morning light turned everything gray and cold. I pulled out the tax notice again and read it in the weak daylight, filtering through dirty windows. 28 days, $6,000, a corporation called Blackwood Development. I didn't know it then, but that name would become the enemy, the dragon, the thing we'd have to slay to survive. Emma leaned against my shoulder and fell asleep. I stayed awake watching Maine scroll past the window. Cities gave way to suburbs. Suburbs gave way to farmland. Farmland gave way to forest. The trees grew thicker, taller, darker. Pine and birch creating a wall of wilderness. The towns we passed through got smaller and smaller, boarded up storefronts, peeling paint. For sale signs that looked like they'd been there for years. This was the Maine people forgot about, the Maine that progress had left behind. We got off the bus in Northwood late in the afternoon. The town wasn't even really a town, a crossroads, a gas station with a single pump that looked older than me, a general store with a faded Coca-Cola sign, a post office, a handful of houses scattered like seeds that hadn't taken root. The air was sharp and clean smelling of pinning and coming winter. It was so quiet I could hear individual leaves skittering across the pavement. A crow called from somewhere in the trees, harsh and lonely. A man in overalls was sweeping the porch of the general store. He stopped when he saw us. Two kids with a backpack standing in the middle of his town, looking lost because we were. I walked up to him, my heart pounding. "Excuse me, sir. We're looking for an address. 412 Ridge Road." He stopped sweeping and leaned on his broom, studying us with eyes that had seen too much to be easily fooled. "Pierce Property, Timur," he said finally, his voice like gravel. "Haven't heard that name in a good long while. Old Eleanor's place." He pointed down the main road with one thick finger. "Follow this road about 3 miles. Turns to dirt. Ridge Road is the first left after the old bridge. Can't miss it." Then he paused and something crossed his face. Sympathy, maybe. Or pity. "But I gotta tell you, son, there ain't much left out there. House has been sitting empty for the better part of 15 years. Winters are hard on a place nobody's taken care of." I thanked him. He just grunted and went back to sweeping, but I felt his eyes on us as we walked away. 3 miles doesn't sound like much until you're walking it with a 10-year-old whose legs are half the length of yours. The paved road turned to dirt, just like he said, a rutted track that wound deeper into the forest. The trees grew thicker here, their branches interlocking overhead, blocking out the fading afternoon light. We crossed a wooden bridge over a fast-moving creek. The planks groaned under our weight, and I could see gaps between them where the water rushed below. On the far side, a rusted signpost, barely readable, said Ridge Road. The road itself was more like a memory of a road. 2 tire tracks overgrown with weeds and small saplings. We followed it as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if I wasn't so scared. Just when I started to think we were completely lost, I saw it through a break in the trees. A house stood on a small rise surrounded by grass that had grown wild and tall. It was a 2-story farmhouse, or it had been once. Now it looked like something time had tried to erase, but hadn't quite finished with. The roof sagged in the middle like a broken spine. Several windows were boarded up with gray weathered planks. The ones that weren't boarded were just dark holes, vacant and empty. The paint had peeled away completely, leaving the wood beneath, exposed to the elements, turned gray and skeletal. A front porch listed to one side, its railing rotted through in places. The whole structure leaned slightly as if it was tired and thinking about lying down. "Is that it?" Imama whispered, and I could hear the fear in her voice. "This is it," I said, trying to sound confident. "This is home." We pushed through the tall grass, the dry stalks scratching at our legs. I tried the front door first. It was swollen in its frame, wouldn't budge no matter how hard I pushed. The iron key slid into the lock with a grinding sound, but it wouldn't turn. 15 years of rust and disuse had made it useless. We walked the perimeter, testing windows, looking for any way in. Around the back, one of the ground floor windows was missing its boards. The glass was completely gone, just jagged teeth around the frame. It was our only option. I cleared away the remaining shards carefully, then pulled myself up and through, dropping into darkness inside. The smell hit me immediately. Dust, mildew, decay. The smell of a place that had been dying slowly for a very long time. I helped Emma through the window, lifting her carefully, setting her down on floorboards that felt soft and spongy under my feet. We stood there in the gloom, letting our eyes adjust. We were in what had been a kitchen. An old cast-iron stove stood against one wall covered in rust. The countertops were thick with grime and mouse droppings. Cabinet doors hung crooked on broken hinges. We moved through the house like ghosts exploring a tomb. Every room told the same story of abandonment. A living room where a sofa had collapsed in on itself, its stuffing spilling out like guts. A dining room with a heavy wooden table buried under 15 years of dust. Upstairs bedrooms empty except for the outlines in the dust where furniture had once stood. The roof had leaked, water stains spread across the walls and ceilings like dark continents on a map of ruin. In one room, part of the ceiling had fallen in completely, leaving a hole through which I could see the sky. It was colder inside than outside. The wind found every crack, every gap whistling through the house like it was playing it like an instrument. A mournful, constant sound. This wasn't a shelter. This was a trap. There was no electricity, no running water, no heat. We couldn't stay here. The panic started to rise in my chest. We had nowhere else to go. We were two runaways in a house that wasn't even really a house anymore. What had I done? Emma was standing in the corner, wrapped in her thin jacket, shivering. I had to find something. Anything. Firewood, blankets, food. I found nothing but decay. Then in the kitchen, I noticed something. A heavy wooden door set into the floor. An iron ring for a handle. I'd walked past it twice without seeing it. I pulled on the ring with both hands. The door was heavy, swollen with age and moisture, but it lifted with a groan of protest. Beneath it, wooden steps leading down into absolute darkness. A wave of cool air rose up to meet me, carrying the smell of earth and stone. "What is that?" Emma asked, her voice very small. "A root cellar," I said. "Stay here." I used my phone's flashlight to guide my way down. The battery was at 15%. I had to make this quick. The steps were solid, surprisingly so. The cellar was small, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, with stone walls and a hard-packed dirt floor. It was draining, completely dry, and the air was still quiet, free from the wind that tormented the house above. The temperature down here was warmer than upstairs. Not warm, but warmer. Maybe 45 degrees instead of 35. In one corner stood wooden shelves, empty except for a few shattered glass jars. In another corner, a pile of old burlap sacks. And against the far wall, half hidden in the shadows, a dark metal object. I moved closer. An old military ammo box painted black, heavy and solid. It had a latch on the front and a small padlock holding it shut. I picked it up. It was heavy. Something inside shifted and rattled. I carried it back up the stairs, my phone's flashlight starting to dim. Emma was right where I'd left her, hugging herself against the cold. "What did you find?" she asked. "I don't know yet," I said, "but I think we're going to sleep down there tonight. In the cellar. It's warmer, safer." We gathered the burlap sacks and made a crude bed on the cellar floor. Spread my thin blanket over them. It wasn't much. It was barely anything. But it was better than the freezing house above. That first night was the longest night of my life. The darkness in the cellar was absolute. No light pollution from distant cities, no street lights, no moon penetrating this deep. Just blackness so complete it felt like a physical presence pressing against my eyes. Emma fell asleep, eventually curled against my side, her breathing finally evening out. I lay awake listening to the wind howl around the house above us. Every gust sounded like footsteps. Every creak sounded like the whole structure collapsing. And I thought about the ammo box sitting 3 feet away in the darkness. What was inside? Money documents, just junk, and I thought about the tax notice. 28 days, $6,000, a debt I had no way to pay. When the first gray light of dawn finally filtered down the cellar stairs, it felt like resurrection. We were cold, we were hungry, we were terrified. But we had survived the night. Now I had to open the box. I carried it outside into the pale morning light. The November air was bitter cold, my breath coming in clouds. I searched the overgrown yard and found what I needed near the collapsed shed. A piece of rebar, heavy and rusted. It took 10 minutes of determined work, smashing the rebar against the small padlock again and again. My hands were scraped and bleeding by the time the metal finally gave way with a sharp crack. But I didn't care. I had to know. I lifted the lid. The first thing I saw was a thick canvas pouch tied shut with a leather cord. It was heavy, and it clinked when I moved it. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I set the pouch aside. My hands were shaking too badly to open it yet. Beneath it, a stack of envelopes, yellowed with age, tied together with a faded blue ribbon. They were addressed to me, to Nathan Pierce. On top of the stack was a single unsealed letter. The handwriting was elegant, flowing, but a little shaky, an old person's handwriting. I pulled it out and began to read. My dearest Nathan, the letter began. If you are reading this, then I am gone and the worst has come to pass. I had to stop, had to breathe. Emma came and stood beside me, putting her small hand on my arm. I kept reading, my voice thick, reading aloud because I needed to hear it to believe it. I hope with all my heart that you are reading this as a man with the system behind you safe and sound. But I am a realist. I fear you are here because you have nowhere else to go. I am so sorry. I need you to know that the story you were told is not the truth. They will have told you that I abandoned you, that your parents were unfit, that I let this house, our home, fall to ruin. None of it is true. Not the important parts. My vision blurred. I blinked, hard tears I didn't want to cry burning in my eyes. This land, this house has been in our family for 100 years. It is not just property, it is our history. 15 years ago, a company called Blackwood Development came to Northwood. They wanted to buy up all the land along this ridge to build a luxury resort. They offered everyone pennies on the dollar. Most people sold. I refused. Your grandfather and I, we loved this place. We believed it was worth fighting for. Blackwood did not like being told no. They began a campaign to force me out. They filed frivolous lawsuits. They reported me for imaginary code violations. They tried to have the property condemned. They bled me dry legally and financially. Your father, my son, tried to help me fight them. They targeted him too. They made his life impossible, harassed him at work until he lost his job. They created the instability that the state used as an excuse to take you and Emma away. Placing you in the system was never the plan. It was meant to be temporary, a way to shield you while I fought. But my heart gave out before my will did. I ran out of time. I looked up from the letter, my mind reeling. Blackwood Development, the same name from the tax notice. This wasn't just about a delinquent property. This was war. A war my grandmother had been fighting alone for years. A war she'd lost. I picked up the next envelope. Inside were legal documents, copies of lawsuits, cease and desist letters from a lawyer named Thomas Caldwell, threatening notices from the county, all documenting a long, brutal battle. There were newspaper clippings too, articles about Blackwood's aggressive expansion into rural Maine, about families forced to sell, about a pattern of predatory acquisition. My grandmother hadn't been neglectful. She'd been a soldier, fighting an enemy with unlimited resources while trying to protect her grandchildren the only way she knew how. The shame I'd carried for 10 years, the quiet certainty that I'd been unwanted, began to transform into something else, something hot and unfamiliar. Anger. They hadn't just taken our home, they'd taken our story. They'd replaced the truth with a lie, and that lie had poisoned everything. Emma looked at me, her eyes wide. So Grandma was a hero. Yeah, I said, and my voice broke on the word. Yeah, she was. Then I picked up the canvas pouch. My fingers fumbled with the knot on the leather cord. When I finally got it undone, I tipped the contents into my hand. Cash. A thick stack of $100 bills wrapped in a rubber band. I counted it twice, my hands trembling. $10,000. Enough to pay the taxes. Enough to save the house. Enough to fight. Hope, fierce and blinding, surged through me. We could do this. We could actually do this. But there was one more letter at the bottom of the box, in a separate sealed envelope. On the front, my grandmother had written in careful letters, "Read this last." I opened it with fingers that had gone numb. The tone of this letter was different. Less story, more instruction. Nathan, it began, I have left you a choice. It is the hardest choice a person can make. In this box is $10,000. It is every last cent I managed to save and hide from them. It is your escape. Option 1, you take this money, you take your sister, and you disappear. Find a small apartment in a city far away from here. Get a job. Keep her safe. Finish school. Live a quiet, normal life. No one would blame you. You owe this place nothing. You owe me nothing but to live and to be happy and free. This is the safe choice. This is the sensible choice. This is what a smart person would do. I could see it so clearly. An apartment with heat and light, Emma in a real school with real friends, me working maybe at a warehouse or a store, coming home at night to warmth and safety. A normal life. But the letter continued. Option 2, you stay. You use the money to pay the taxes and halt the seizure. But know this, that will not be the end of it. It will be the beginning. Paying the taxes will put you on Blackwood's radar. They will come for you just as they came for me. They will use the system against you. They will try to take Emma. They will try to break you. In the other envelopes, you will find all the evidence I gathered in the name of the one lawyer in this town I trusted, Thomas Caldwell. It might be enough to fight them. It might not. This choice means staying here in this broken house through a winter that will test you in ways you cannot imagine. It means a war you are not equipped to fight. It is the harder path. It is, I suspect, the impossible path. The letter ended with a final paragraph that broke something in me. I cannot tell you which to choose. The grandmother in me screams for you to take the money and run to save yourself. But the woman who fought for this land, the woman who was your grandfather's wife, knows that some things are worth fighting for, even if you lose. The choice is yours. Whatever you decide, know that I loved you. I have always loved you. Your Eleanor. I lowered the letter. The $10,000 sat heavy in my lap. A key to freedom. An escape from everything. I looked at Emma. She was so small, so fragile. How could I ask her to endure a winter in a root cellar? How could I subject her to a legal battle that my grandmother had already lost? The sensible choice was clear. Run, start over, be safe. But I looked around me, at the sagging house, at the overgrown land, at the tall, silent trees standing like sentinels. This wasn't just a plot of land. This was my grandmother's last stand. This was where my father had fought and lost. This was the last piece of our family that hadn't been erased by lawyers and corporations and the machinery of power. Running felt like betrayal. It felt like letting Blackwood win not just once, but forever. It felt like agreeing with their version of our story, that we were disposable, that our history didn't matter. A sob rose in my throat. I cried. I cried for the years we'd lost. I cried for the grandmother I'd never known, but now loved with a fierce protective grief. I cried for my father who'd been broken by this fight, and I cried for the impossible choice she'd left me. Emma wrapped her small arms around my neck. It's okay, Nathan. Whatever we do, we'll do it together. Her simple faith was both comfort and crushing weight. I spent the rest of that day walking the property line, the letters in my pocket, the money a heavy secret in my backpack. I stood on the ridge behind the house looking out over the valley. Autumn was fading, the brilliant colors giving way to browns and grays. Winter was coming. You could feel it in the air. I thought about that warm apartment in some distant city, about Emma in school, about me working steady coming home to light and heat. It was a beautiful dream, a safe dream. Then I looked back at the house, our house, broken and beaten, but still standing. Leaving it felt like leaving part of myself behind to be bulldozed and erased. Sometime in the deep, cold hours of that night, huddled in the cellar with Emma sleeping beside me, I made my decision. I wouldn't be the one who let our story end. I wouldn't let Blackwood win. I would fight. When Emma woke in the morning, I told her everything. The money, the choice, the war ahead. I told her it would be hard and cold, and I didn't know if we could win. If you want to leave, Emma, we'll leave right now. It's your choice too. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she looked around the small cellar at the stone walls and dirt floor. This is Grandma's house, she said. Not a question, a statement. She was a hero. I want to stay. I want to be a hero too. I pulled her into a hug, my heart feeling like it might burst. Okay, I whispered. We stay. Our first step was finding the lawyer, Thomas Caldwell. The name was on the old legal letters. His office was on Northwood's Main Street. We walked the 3 miles back to town the next morning. This time the walk felt different. Not a retreat, an advance. Mr. Caldwell's office was squeezed between the general store and a defunct laundromat. Gold leaf lettering flaking off the window, Thomas Caldwell, attorney at law. We stepped inside. The office was drowning in paper. towers of books and files everywhere. An elderly man with white hair and thick glasses looked up from a massive desk. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice like dry paper. "Are you Mr. Caldwell?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "I'm Nathan Pierce. This is my sister Emma. Our grandmother was Eleanor Pierce." The name hung in the air. Something passed across his face, recognition, then sadness. "Eleanor," he said softly. "God, I tried to save her. I'm so sorry I couldn't." I placed the ammo box on his desk, showed him the letters, the legal documents, the evidence, told him our story, all of it. Then I pushed the stack of $100 bills across his desk. "This is $10,000. My grandmother said to use it to pay the taxes and to fight Blackwood. Will you take our case?" He stared at the money for a long time. Then he looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. "Your 18 years old son. You're a runaway. You're harboring another runaway. The state could take your sister and charge you with kidnapping. And you want to pick a fight with a multi-million-dollar corporation that has this county's government in its pocket. A fight your grandmother, a grown woman with resources, lost." "Yes," I said. The word was quiet, but it didn't waver. He leaned back in his chair. It squeaked in protest. He looked at Emma, who stared back at him with defiant eyes. He looked at the evidence spread across his desk. Then slowly a smile spread across his tired face. The first genuine smile I'd seen in this town. "Eleanor always did have a flair for the dramatic," he said. "All right, son, I'll take your case. I'm telling Michael this story on a winter afternoon, but I need him to understand what winter meant in 1982. Not the mild, apologetic winters we get now. I'm talking about a winter that came down from Canada like an invading army, temperatures that could kill you in hours, snow that buried roads and made the world disappear. The hardest part wasn't Blackwood," I tell him. "It was learning that nature doesn't care about your courage. It only cares if you're strong enough to survive." Michael leans forward. He's never known real cold, not the kind that gets inside your bones and stays there. "What happened after the lawyer took your case?" I look out the window at the valley, and for a moment, I'm not 60 years old sitting in a warm office. I'm 18 again, standing in Thomas Caldwell's cluttered office, watching him work with a speed that belied his age. That afternoon, November 18th, 1982, Caldwell moved like a man half his years. He took $6,500 of our money and drove himself to the county office. Came back 2 hours later with a stamped receipt. The taxes were paid in full. The auction was stopped. "That buys you time," he said, sliding the receipt across his desk to me. "But it also sends a message to Blackwood. They'll know someone's fighting back now." He filed an emergency petition for temporary guardianship, citing my status as Emma's only living relative and our legal claim to family property. He filed an injunction against Blackwood Development, accusing them of predatory acquisition and harassment. He used my grandmother's documentation as evidence. "It's a long shot," he warned me. "All of it, but it's a shot." He gave me $200 from what remained. "Go to George's store. Get food, blankets, a propane heater for that cellar. Get tools. You've got a court inspection coming in 3 weeks, and you need to make that place look like you're at least trying to make it livable." We walked back to the general store. George Mitchell, the man who'd given us directions that first day, was restocking shelves. When we entered, he studied us with those careful eyes. We bought canned soup and beans, dried pasta and rice, 3 thick wool blankets, a small propane heater and 2 canisters of fuel, a hammer, nails, a saw, flashlights and batteries. And it came to $180. As George rang it up, he said, "You're Eleanor's grandkids." It wasn't a question. I nodded. His expression softened in a way I hadn't expected. "She was a good woman, stubborn as a mule, but good. This town didn't treat her right at the end. If you need anything, you come see me. Don't be too proud." I was too surprised to speak. I just nodded again. We hauled our supplies back to the house, our arms loaded. For the first time, it felt like we were walking towards something instead of running from it. We were preparing. We were fighting back. That night, we set up the propane heater in the cellar. It cast a warm glow on the stone walls, making our underground refuge feel almost cozy. We heated soup on the camp stove Caldwell had given us. It wasn't much, but it was ours. Emma arranged our blankets, neatly organizing the cellar like she was decorating a room. She took a piece of charcoal from the camp stove and drew on the stone wall a picture of a castle with two figures standing in front of it, a tall one and a small one. "That's us," she said, "defending our kingdom." I looked at her drawing in the flickering light of the heater, and something in my chest loosened. We weren't just surviving, we were building something. But 3 days later, everything changed. I was outside chopping wood from the collapsed shed when I heard it. The sound of an engine, expensive and powerful, warming up our rutted dirt road. No one came out here. No one except us. A black Mercedes sedan appeared through the trees, picking its way carefully over the potholes. It stopped in front of the house. The door opened and a man stepped out. He was maybe 38, dressed in a suit that cost more than everything I owned. His hair was perfectly styled, his shoes polished to a mirror shine despite the dirt road. He carried a leather briefcase and had the kind of face that had learned to smile without meaning it. "Nathan Pierce," he said, walking toward me. Not a question, a statement. I set down the axe, my hands tightening into fists. "This is private property. You're trespassing." He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Actually, until 3 days ago, this was Blackwood property. You just delayed the inevitable." He looked around at the sagging house, the overgrown yard. "Some delay." "My grandmother fought you for 15 years, I said. His smile faded. "And where is she now?" The words hit like a punch. He let the silence hang there, sharp and cruel. "Let me tell you about your grandmother, Nathan. Margaret Pierce, born 1910, married Robert Pierce in 1932. They bought this property for $800 during the Depression. By 1967, Blackwood offered her $20,000. That's a 2,000% return. Most people would call that a miracle, but not Margaret. She called it an insult. She wanted $50,000. We said no. She started a war. She wanted to keep her home, I said. She wanted to be stubborn, he corrected. There's a difference. He moved closer and I could smell his cologne, expensive and foreign. I grew up poor, Nathan, in a trailer park in West Virginia. My father worked in coal mines, died of black lung when I was 12. My mother cleaned houses. I understand the sentiment, I really do. But sentiment doesn't keep you warm in winter. It doesn't feed your sister. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a checkbook. "I'm authorized to offer you $25,000. Cash, today. Take Emma somewhere warm. Enroll in school. Get your GED. Start fresh. Your grandmother's fight is over. You don't have to die on her hill." "This isn't about money," I said. His eyes went hard. "Then it's about pride. And pride, Nathan, is the most expensive thing in the world." He put the checkbook away and pulled out documents instead. "I've already filed motions to dismiss your guardianship petition. Grounds unfit minor, no income, unsuitable living conditions. I've filed to have this property condemned under Maine Health and Safety Code. Structural hazards, no utilities, rodent infestation. And I've reported you to state police for child endangerment and custodial interference." He stacked the papers neatly on the hood of his Mercedes. "You have 3 weeks until that court inspection. Temperature will drop to 20 below zero this winter, Nathan. This house has no heat, no running water, no electricity. You're not fighting me. You're fighting winter, and winter doesn't negotiate." He walked back to his car, opened the door, then paused. "One more thing. I was in Vietnam, Khe Sanh. I saw boys your age try to be heroes. You know what happened to them." He let the question hang in the cold air. "They died, and no one remembered their names." The Mercedes rolled away, kicking up dust and dead leaves. I stood there shaking not from cold, but from rage and fear in equal measure. Emma came running out from the house where she'd been hiding. "Can he really take me away?" I looked down at her scared face and made myself sound certain. "Not if we make this place a home." But inside I wasn't certain at all. Vincent Cross, that was his name. He'd left his card on the hood, and he'd made it clear this was war. The next 3 weeks were brutal. We worked from sunrise to sunset every day, transforming the house from ruin to something that might pass for habitable. We boarded every broken window with wood scavenged from the collapsed shed. We patched holes in the walls with scraps of tin and tar paper we found in the barn. We swept and scrubbed the kitchen and one small bedroom until our hands were raw. We hauled out years of debris and mouse droppings, bag after bag of decay. The propane heater kept the cellar at a bearable 40 degrees. We rationed the fuel carefully, using it only in the evenings when the temperature dropped. During the day, we worked ourselves warm, and at night we huddled together under our blankets. Emma never complained. She worked alongside me, carrying boards, holding tools, sweeping endlessly. She made the cellar feel like a home, drawing pictures on the walls, arranging our few possessions with care. But the cold was coming. You could feel it in the air, taste it in the wind. The temperature dropped steadily. 35 degrees. 30, 25, 20. The first snow came on December 1st. Not a gentle dusting, but 3 inches overnight. We woke to a world transformed, white and silent and beautiful and terrifying. Because snow meant winter was here. Real winter. And we were living in a house with no heat. On December 8th, 18 days after Caldwell filed our petition, the inspection happened. I heard the car before I saw it. A black sedan with state plates. A woman got out, 31 or 32, wearing a sharp suit and carrying a clipboard and camera. Her face had that professional mask I'd seen so many times. The face of someone who'd learned to care just enough to do their job, but not enough to let it hurt them. "Nathan Pierce," she asked. "Yes, ma'am." "I'm Sarah Davies, Department of Health and Human Services. I'm here to inspect the property and assess suitability for minor guardianship." She walked through the house, methodically taking notes, snapping photos. She noted the boarded windows, the patched walls. She tested floorboards, finding some that were still soft and spongy. She checked for running water. There wasn't any. The well was frozen. She looked at our outhouse, our camp stove, our makeshift living arrangements. Then she descended into the cellar. She stood there, taking in the stone walls, the dirt floor, our sleeping pallets made of burlap and blankets, the propane heater, Emma's drawings on the walls, our food supplies organized on the shelves. "You're living underground," she said, and I couldn't read her tone. "It's the warmest part of the house," I explained. "We have the heater, plenty of food and blankets. We're working on fixing the rest." She asked about school. I told her about the homeschool program Caldwell was arranging. She asked about income. I told her about my plans to get my GED to apply for college scholarships for former foster youth. She asked about medical care. I told her the town doctor had agreed to see us. She was silent for a long time, looking from me to Emma, who stood beside me, holding my hand. "This is highly irregular, Nathan," she said finally. "An 18-year-old and a 10-year-old living in these conditions. No electricity, no running water, temperatures below freezing. My report will not be favorable." My heart sank. I'd known it was a long shot, but hearing it stated so flatly felt like a door slamming shut. But then she added something that confused me. "Mr. Caldwell filed for a 90-day continuance pending a full hearing. The judge granted it. For now, you can stay. But I will be back, and I expect to see significant progress." As she was leaving, she paused at the cellar stairs. "The propane. You're rationing it." "Yes, ma'am. 2 canisters have to last us." Something flickered in her eyes. "There's a fuel assistance program. I'll send you the paperwork." Then so quietly I almost missed it, she said, "My mother lost her farm to Blackwood 10 years ago." She climbed the stairs and was gone before I could respond. Emma looked up at me. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said slowly, "we're not alone." But we were about to learn just how alone we really were. The blizzard hit on December 16th. The radio, an old battery-powered one George had given us, crackled with warnings. Major winter storm, 2 to 3 feet of snow, wind chill 40 below zero. Residents advised to stay indoors and avoid all travel. We prepared as best we could. I brought in every scrap of firewood I could find. We filled containers with snow to melt for water. We stocked the cellar with 3 days of food. We piled on every blanket we had. The storm arrived like an army. The wind screamed around the house so loud we had to shout to hear each other. Snow came down in sheets so thick you couldn't see 5 feet. It piled against the house in massive drifts, burying the windows, turning our world into a white tomb. For 48 hours, we huddled in the cellar while the storm raged above. The temperature dropped and dropped and dropped. Even with the propane heater running constantly, the cellar stayed barely above freezing. Emma shivered despite being wrapped in every blanket we had. And then on the evening of December 19th, the worst happened. The propane heater sputtered, coughed, died. I checked the canister. Empty. Grabbed the second one, also empty. The temperature in the cellar immediately started to drop. 40 degrees, 38, 35, 32. Emma's lips started to turn blue. Her teeth chattered so hard I could hear them clicking together. Panic seized me by the throat. This was it. This was how I failed her. I'd brought her here to this frozen hell, and now she was going to die because I'd been too proud to take the money and run. I wrapped her in every blanket, held her against me, trying to share body heat. But it wasn't enough. She was shivering violently, her small body convulsing with cold. "I'm cold, Nathan," she mumbled. "So cold." I'd never felt so helpless in my life. The storm was still raging outside. We couldn't go to town. We'd freeze to death before we made it 100 yards. We were trapped in a stone box, watching the temperature drop degree by degree. "Please," I whispered to no one, to God, to my grandmother's ghost. "Please help me. I don't know what to do." And then in that moment of absolute desperation, clarity came. The house itself was fuel. I'd seen that old cast iron stove in the kitchen. I'd seen the chimney, and outside all around us was wood. The collapsed shed, the rotted porch railings, dead branches everywhere. I could burn the house to save us. I left Emma buried in blankets and went upstairs. The temperature in the main house was -5 degrees, colder than outside because there was no insulation. My breath froze in clouds. My fingers went numb within seconds. I found the stove and examined the chimney by flashlight. The flue was blocked solid with 15 years of debris. Birds' nests leave soot packed like concrete. I found a long stick, a broken curtain rod, and started jabbing it up the chimney. Debris rained down into the firebox, coating me in black grime. I kept working my hands so cold I couldn't feel them anymore. Finally, I felt the stick break through. Cold air rushed down the chimney. Draft. Then I went outside into the blizzard. The wind hit me like a fist, knocking me sideways. The snow was waist deep and still falling. I couldn't see the shed. Couldn't see anything. Just white chaos. I used the house itself as a landmark, keeping one hand on the wall as I fought my way around to where I remembered the shed being. Found it by running into it, barking my shin on a buried board. The wood was frozen solid, but the shed was rotten enough that I could break it apart with my bare hands and feet. I kicked and pulled and tore, ignoring the splinters driving into my palms. I couldn't feel the pain anyway. Couldn't feel anything. I made 6 trips from the shed to the house, dragging armloads of wood through the storm. Each trip I was terrified I'd lose my way, that I'd wander off into the white and freeze to death 10 feet from safety. But I used the flashlight in the window as a beacon, a tiny point of light in the chaos. By the time I had enough wood, my hands were bleeding. I couldn't tell if it was from the splinters or from the cold cracking my skin open. I didn't care. Building the fire was its own battle. My hands were too numb to strike a match. I had to warm them under my armpits, blow on them until I could feel my fingers again. Even then, it took 3 tries to get the match lit. I touched the flame to newspaper the pages I'd found lining old shelves. The paper caught. I added kindling, small pieces of the rotten wood. Smoke billowed out, making me cough and choke my eyes streaming. But then the draft caught. The smoke reversed course and rushed up the chimney. I added larger pieces of wood. The fire grew crackling and spitting. Orange flames licked at the wood. The cast iron of the stove began to warm slowly at first, then faster. Heat, actual heat, radiating out into the frozen room. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I went down to the cellar and carried Emma up, blankets and all, set her down in front of the stove. We sat there together, wrapped in our blankets, and watched the fire. Slowly, painfully slowly, the shivering stopped. Color returned to her lips, her eyes focused. "You did it," she whispered. "You saved us." I held her and stared at the flames, understanding something fundamental. The house that had been trying to kill us had just saved our lives. The burden had become salvation. We'd found a way to survive. After that night, everything changed. We moved our sleeping pallets upstairs into the room next to the kitchen, where we could keep the fire going. I learned to bank the embers at night so the fire would last until morning. I learned which wood burned longest, how to split it properly, how to stack it so it would dry. George came out after the storm on a tractor with a plow attachment, clearing our lane. He brought supplies: flour, salt, potatoes. 2 more canisters of propane, though we didn't need them anymore. Figured you might be running low, was all he said. A few days later, Thomas Caldwell came. His old car chugged up the newly cleared lane and he climbed out with news. Blackwood's lawyers overplayed their hand, he said, stamping snow from his boots. They filed a motion claiming you were unfit based on a falsified inspection report. I was able to prove it was falsified. The judge wasn't pleased. He's dismissed their motion and scheduled our guardianship hearing for February 10th. He's keeping the injunction against them in place, pending further investigation. He handed me an envelope. This came for you, from the State Scholarship Board. I opened it with shaking hands. An acceptance letter. Based on my academic records from before foster care, I'd been awarded a grant for community college. Full tuition, contingent on obtaining my GED. It was a door opening, a future I'd thought was closed. Christmas came. We had no money for gifts. I carved Emma a small wooden horse using a knife George had given me. Emma made me a book, pages of drawings showing our story. The last page showed the two of us in front of the house with a ghostly figure behind us. Grandma Margaret watching over us. George came on Christmas afternoon with a small turkey, potatoes, canned cranberry sauce. We ate together, the three of us, and George told stories about Margaret. How she'd stood up to Blackwood, how she'd fought when no one else would, how the town had admired her but been too afraid to help. I'm sorry I didn't help her, George said, his voice rough. I was scared, but I'm not scared anymore. Word was spreading through Northwood about the Pierce kids living in the condemned house. Some people thought it was shameful that social services should take Emma away, but others remembered what Blackwood had done. Others had their own scars. Pastor Jameson from the Methodist Church brought food. Doc Morrison, the town doctor, who was 72 years old, offered free medical care. Mary Patterson, who owned the diner and had lost her own farm to Blackwood in 1975, sent hot meals once a week. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were becoming part of something. A community. People who remembered what it meant to fight for what mattered. The deep cold of January came. Nights when the temperature dropped to 20 below. Mornings when the water in our bucket was frozen solid. But we had the fire. We had food. We had each other. And we had a hearing scheduled for February 10th. A chance to make this permanent. A chance to win. But Blackwood wasn't done with us yet. On the morning of January 15th, Thomas Caldwell called. His voice was tight with urgency. Nathan Blackwood filed an emergency motion. They're pushing up the hearing date, and they've submitted new evidence. Professional photographs of the house, an affidavit from a structural engineer claiming imminent collapse, a child psychologist report saying Emma's in a traumatic environment. But she's never met Emma, I said. I know, it's all bought and paid for, but it looks official, and that's what matters to a court. The hearing is February 10th, 3 weeks away. We need to be ready. 2 days later, Vincent Cross returned, but this time he wasn't alone. He brought the county building inspector, a nervous-looking man named Harold Brennan. They walked through the house while I followed helpless. Brennan tested floorboards, checked the stove chimney, noted the lack of running water and electricity. He documented everything, while Cross watched with cold satisfaction. I'll have to issue an evacuation order, Brennan said, not meeting my eyes. Health code violations. Structural concerns. I'm sorry, son. I'm just following regulations. You have 48 hours to vacate. This is our home, I said. Cross's smile was thin and sharp. No, this is a ruin, and you're a child playing house. But Caldwell arrived before they could leave. He'd been expecting this. Harold, you can issue the notice, he said calmly, but Nathan has the right to appeal to the judge. That process takes a minimum of 10 days. The judge will hear it at the guardianship hearing. Brennan looked relieved. Cross looked furious. Don't play games, Tom, Cross said. No games, Vincent, just law. Nathan can stay pending appeal. Cross turned to me one last time before leaving. 3 more weeks of freezing then. See if I care. But as he walked to his car, he stopped, turned back, and for just a moment, something shifted in his eyes. Not quite respect, not quite sympathy, something harder to name. I told you, he said quietly, winter doesn't negotiate, and neither do I. The Mercedes drove away, leaving us standing in the snow. Emma took my hand. Are we going to lose? I looked down at her, at this small person who trusted me with everything. No, I said. We're going to fight. For the next 3 weeks, I worked like a man possessed. I reinforced the sagging porch. I patched every hole I could find. I organized our living space to look as presentable as possible. I created a school area for Emma with books and a makeshift desk I'd found in the attic. Caldwell prepared our legal case. He gathered witnesses. George, Mary Patterson, Pastor Jameson, Doc Morrison. People who could testify to our progress, to our character, to the pattern of Blackwood's predatory behavior. And Sarah Davies came back on January 30th, unannounced. She saw the improvements, the fire blazing, the house warm at 55 degrees, Emma doing math problems at her desk healthy and happy, our food well stocked, everything organized and clean. She interviewed Emma privately, asked if she was happy, if she was scared, if she wanted to stay with me. More than anything, Emma told her. Sarah's report, which she shared with Caldwell, was different from her first one. It still noted that conditions weren't ideal, but it also documented significant improvement and strong sibling bond. It recommended conditional guardianship with oversight. It wasn't a guarantee of victory, but it was a chance. As Sarah was leaving, she stopped at the door. Looked back at me. For what it's worth, she said, you're doing what I wish I'd seen someone do for my mother. Keep fighting. I'm sitting here telling Michael this story, and I can see he's starting to understand that survival isn't about one big moment of heroism. It's about 1,000 small decisions to keep going when everything in you wants to quit. The hearing was in 3 days, I tell him. We'd survived the worst winter Maine had seen in 20 years. We'd turned a ruin into something like a home. We'd built a case. We'd found allies. But we still didn't know if it would be enough. Michael's eyes are wide. What happened? I smile. That grandson is where things got interesting. Michael's leaning forward now, completely absorbed. Good, he needs to hear this part. Needs to understand that the hardest battles aren't always fought with fists or guns. Sometimes they're fought in wood-paneled courtrooms with nothing but truth and stubbornness on your side. The night before the hearing, I tell him, I didn't sleep at all, just sat by the fire watching the flames, thinking about everything that had brought us to that moment. Emma was asleep upstairs, trusting me to make this work. That trust was heavier than any weight I'd ever carried. I paused, remembering the cold clarity of that February night, the way the fire had painted shadows on the walls, the way my grandmother's letters had felt in my hands when I'd read them one more time looking for strength. I thought about my grandmother fighting for 15 years. I thought about my father losing everything to help her. And I thought about Vincent Cross's words, that boys who try to be heroes just end up dead and forgotten. I decided he was wrong. February 10th, 1983 dawned cold and clear. The kind of winter morning where the sky is so blue it hurts to look at and the snow crunches under your feet like broken glass. Emma and I dressed in the church clothes Pastor Jameson had given us. They were donated too big on me and too small on her, but they were clean and pressed. George drove us to the county seat in his truck, the old engine groaning as we wound through roads still edged with snowbanks. Thomas Caldwell was already there waiting on the courthouse steps. He looked older than usual, tired, but his eyes were sharp. Ready? He asked. I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. The courtroom was small, wood-paneled, smelling of old paper and furniture polish. Maybe 20 seats for spectators. Most were empty, but the ones that were filled mattered. George sat in the front row. Mary Patterson from the diner. Pastor Jameson. Doc Morrison. People who decided that this fight was worth showing up for. On the other side sat Vincent Cross and 2 associates, all in expensive suits that probably cost more than our entire house was worth. They had leather briefcases and the kind of confidence that comes from never having lost. At the front, behind the bench, sat Judge Helen Morrison. No relation to the doctor as far as I knew. She was maybe 58 with iron gray hair and a face that had forgotten how to smile. Stern. Republican. The kind of judge who valued self-reliance and hard work, but also believed in protecting children at any cost. She could go either way. That's what Caldwell had told me. She could see us as brave kids fighting the good fight, or she could see us as deluded children endangering a minor. Everything depended on the next 2 hours. Sarah Davies sat off to the side representing the state. She didn't look at me, just stared down at her papers, her face carefully neutral. All rise, the bailiff said. Judge Morrison took her seat, arranged her papers, and looked out at the courtroom with eyes that gave nothing away. We're here for the matter of Pierce versus the state of Maine petition for guardianship, she said. Her voice was like gravel. Mr. Cross, you're representing Blackwood Development as an intervening party. You may present your case. Cross stood, and even that simple movement was calculated. Confident, powerful. He'd done this 100 times. Your Honor, he began. This case is straightforward. Nathan Pierce is 18 years old. He has no income, no high school diploma, no parenting experience. He's living in a structure that should be demolished, where temperatures regularly drop below freezing, where there's no electricity, no running water, no proper sanitation. He gestured to a folder on his table. We've submitted photographs, structural assessments, expert testimony. All of it paints the same picture. This is child endangerment masquerading as noble intent. His voice softened, became almost sympathetic. We all admire loyalty, Your Honor. The bond between siblings is important, but loyalty doesn't keep children safe. The law exists precisely for situations like this, to protect children from well-meaning adults who put sentiment above welfare. He paused for effect. Emma Pierce deserves a real home, a warm home, a stable home with parents who can provide for her needs. We ask the court to deny guardianship and place Emma with a qualified foster family where she can thrive. He sat down. It had been perfect, reasonable, compassionate sounding. Everything designed to make me look like a foolish kid playing at being an adult. Caldwell stood slowly. He didn't have Cross's polish. His suit was old, a little threadbare at the elbows. His briefcase was scuffed leather, held together with tape. But when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 40 years practicing law in small towns where people's lives hung in the balance. Your Honor, Mr. Cross makes this sound simple. It's not. This case is about whether an 18-year-old man, and let me be clear, 18 is legally an adult in this state, can care for his sister on property he legally owns. He opened his briefcase and pulled out documents. Nathan Pierce owns that property outright. The taxes are paid in full. He has representation. He has community support. He's enrolled in a GED program and has been awarded a college scholarship contingent on completion. Caldwell's voice grew stronger. More importantly, Your Honor, this case is about what happened to the Pierce family, about how a corporation with unlimited resources systematically destroyed them because one woman refused to sell her land. Objection, Cross said, standing. Irrelevant to the guardianship question. Overruled, Judge Morrison said. I'll allow it. Continue, Mr. Caldwell. Thank you, Your Honor. Nathan Pierce isn't some random teenager trying to raise a child. He's the last of a family that was targeted and destroyed by predatory business practices. His grandmother fought Blackwood Development for 15 years. They filed frivolous lawsuits. They harassed his father until he lost his job. They created the instability that led to Nathan and Emma being placed in foster care. And when Margaret Pierce died from the stress, Blackwood thought they'd won. He looked at me, then at Emma. But they didn't count on Nathan being willing to finish his grandmother's fight. They didn't count on a bond strong enough to survive the worst winter this state has seen in 2 decades. Caldwell turned back to the judge. We asked for conditional guardianship. Give Nathan 6 months under supervision. If he fails, then remove Emma. But let him try. Let him prove that family is worth fighting for. He sat down. The courtroom was silent. Judge Morrison made a note, then looked up. Mr. Cross, call your first witness. Cross's case was methodical and devastating. He called Harold Brennan, the building inspector, who testified about structural deficiencies and code violations. Under cross-examination, Caldwell got him to admit he'd been paid $5,000 by Blackwood as a consultant the previous year, but the damage was done. Cross called Dr. Patricia Morse, a child psychologist from Portland who'd never met Emma, but testified based on file review and developmental theory that living in such conditions would create lasting trauma and attachment issues. Caldwell tore into her on cross-examination. Dr. Morse, you've never met Emma Pierce, correct? No, but my assessment is based on, yes or no, please. You've never met her. No. Never seen her schoolwork? Her drawings never spoken to anyone who knows her. My methodology doesn't require, how much is Blackwood paying you for this testimony? I'm being compensated at my standard rate of $200 per hour. So you're testifying about a child you've never met, based on theory while being paid by the party trying to take that child from her brother. Objection, Cross said. Badgering. Sustained, Judge Morrison said. Move on, Mr. Caldwell. But the point had been made. I could see it in the judge's face. A flicker of skepticism. Cross submitted the property photographs, the evacuation order, my juvenile record from the incident with Dale Miller. He built a picture of dangerous conditions and an unfit guardian piece by careful piece. When he finished, he looked satisfied, like a man who'd just won. Then it was our turn. Caldwell called George Mitchell first. George walked to the stand in his work clothes, his hands rough and calloused, looking uncomfortable, in the formal setting, but steady. Mr. Mitchell, how long have you known the Pierce family? 43 years. Started selling supplies to Margaret and Robert Pierce in 1940 when I came back from the war. Tell the court about Blackwood Development's treatment of Margaret Pierce. George's jaw tightened. They killed her. Maybe not with a gun, but they killed her just the same. Started in '67 when she wouldn't sell. They filed lawsuits over nothing. Claimed her property was a nuisance, brought down neighboring values. Reported her for code violations that didn't exist. Bled her dry with legal fees. How do you know this? Because they tried the same thing with me when I wouldn't sell my store. Had the health inspector coming once a week. Suppliers mysteriously canceling contracts. Anonymous complaints about noise about loitering. I knew what they were doing because I watched them do it to Margaret first. Cross stood. Objection, Your Honor. Speculation and hearsay. Your Honor, Caldwell said. Mr. Mitchell is testifying to his personal experience and direct observation. Overruled. Continue. George looked at me, then at the judge. Those kids are fighting the same fight their grandmother fought. And this town failed Margaret. We were too scared to help her. I won't fail her grandchildren. Mary Patterson testified next. Told how Blackwood had offered her mother 30 days to sell their farm in 1975. How her mother had a heart attack from the stress. How she died 2 weeks later. Nathan's grandmother died the same way. Mary said, her voice breaking. Heart attack from fighting them. These children are doing what I didn't have the courage to do. They're standing their ground. Pastor Jameson testified about visiting the house weekly, about watching Nathan teach Emma mathematics, about the family bond he'd witnessed. Dr. Morrison testified about Emma's health. I've examined her 3 times. She's well-nourished, no signs of abuse or neglect. In 50 years of practice, I've seen real child endangerment. Your Honor, this isn't it. Each witness was a brick in the wall we were building, a wall between Emma and the system that had already failed us once. Then Caldwell called Sarah Davies. She walked to the stand with her professional mask firmly in place, got sworn in, sat down, wouldn't look at me. Ms. Davies, Caldwell said, you inspected the Pierce property in December and again in January. What's your recommendation to the court? I held my breath. Sarah had said her first report would be unfavorable. This was where we could lose everything. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked up and something had changed in her face. The mask was cracking. Your Honor, my initial assessment in December was unfavorable. I documented inadequate shelter, lack of utilities, concerns about winter survival. I recommended against guardianship. My heart sank. Emma's hand tightened around mine. But I returned twice, January 30th and February 5th. What I saw was transformation. Her voice grew stronger. I saw an 18-year-old teaching his sister mathematics by firelight. Her test scores exceed grade level. I saw a house that's imperfect, but warm, clean, stocked with food. I saw a girl who draws pictures of her family, her and her brother, with the word home written underneath in careful letters. Sarah turned to look at the judge directly. I saw living conditions that aren't ideal by middle-class standards. But I also saw something I've rarely seen in 30 years of social work. I saw a sibling bond so strong that a boy chose the impossible path rather than abandon his sister. I saw a child who feels safe, loved, and protected. Cross was on his feet. Your Honor, this witness is clearly biased. Mr. Cross, Judge Morrison said coldly, Mrs. Davies is a state employee with 30 years of experience. I'll give her testimony. Appropriate weight. Sit down. Cross sat his face tight with anger. Sarah continued, and now her voice was trembling slightly. Your Honor, I need to disclose something. My mother, Linda Davies, lost her farm to Blackwood Development in 1974. The stress caused a stroke. She died in 1975. I was 11 years old. The courtroom went absolutely silent. I became a social worker because I wanted to protect children. But sometimes we protect them from the wrong things. Sometimes we remove children from imperfect homes and place them in perfect placements that destroy them anyway. She looked at me finally, and there were tears in her eyes. I've seen hundreds of foster placements. I've seen abuse. I've seen neglect. I've seen children warehoused in group homes move from family to family until they age out with no connections, no roots, nothing. And then I see Nathan Pierce, who chose to fight rather than run, who survived a winter that should have killed them both, who's building a home with bleeding hands and sheer will. Her voice steadied. A flawed home built with love is better than a perfect placement built with paperwork. I recommend conditional guardianship, 6 months supervised. If Nathan fails, remove Emma then, but give him the chance to succeed. She stepped down from the stand. Cross looked like he'd been punched. Even Judge Morrison's stern face had softened slightly. Then Caldwell called me. I walked to the stand feeling like I was walking to an execution. Got sworn in, sat down, tried to remember to breathe. Caldwell kept it simple. Nathan, why do you want to raise Emma? Because she's my sister. Because we're all each other has. Because I promised her I wouldn't leave her, and I keep my promises. What if you fail? What if you can't provide everything she needs? I looked at Emma sitting in the front row. Then I'll have failed trying, but I won't fail by giving up. Cross stood for cross-examination. He moved in like a shark smelling blood. Mr. Pierce, you have no income, correct? I'm studying for my GED. I have a college scholarship waiting. I'll work. You're living in a condemned house. I'm restoring it. Every day it gets better. You assaulted your foster father. The word hit like a slap. He assaulted me. He broke my jaw. I defended myself. That's your version. That's the truth. Cross leaned in close. You're a child playing at being an adult. You have no idea what you're doing. You're going to fail, and when you do, Emma will be the one who suffers. Something in me snapped. I'd been quiet and respectful all day, but I was done being talked down to by a man who thought money and power meant he could rewrite reality. I'm 18 years old, I said, my voice steady and cold. Old enough to be drafted, old enough to sign contracts, old enough to be tried as an adult if I committed a crime. The law says I'm an adult, and I'm acting like one, taking responsibility, fighting for my family. I looked directly at Cross. You're a man who thinks sentiment is weakness, but you're wrong. My grandmother's sentiment kept her fighting for 15 years against people like you. My sentiment got me and Emma through a winter that should have killed us. Sentiment is just another word for love, and love is the strongest thing there is. Cross's face went red. Your Honor, I think we've heard enough, Judge Morrison said. Mr. Pierce, you may step down. Caldwell gave his closing argument. Cross gave his. Both were good. Both were passionate. But I could tell from Judge Morrison's face that the decision had already been made. She called a 15-minute recess. We waited in the hallway, not talking. Emma held my hand. George put his hand on my shoulder. Caldwell paced nervous for the first time. When we filed back in, Judge Morrison looked out at the courtroom with an expression I couldn't read. I've presided over this bench for 22 years, she began. I've seen many guardianship cases. This one is unusual. My heart was pounding, but I could feel it in my throat. The law gives me limited leeway, but it does give me discretion. Mr. Pierce, you are 18 years old. You have no income, no high school diploma. You're living in a structure that barely meets habitability standards. You have been in the foster system for 10 years. You have a documented incident of violence. Emma's hand was crushing mine. This was it. We were losing. By every conventional metric, I should deny this petition. The word should hung in the air. However, Judge Morrison paused. You have demonstrated resourcefulness, dedication, and fierce protective love. You have community support. You have legal representation. You have property. And you have, against all odds, kept Emma safe through one of the harshest winters in Maine history. She looked at Cross. More importantly, I've reviewed the evidence Mr. Caldwell presented regarding Blackwood Development's conduct. I find a disturbing pattern of harassment and predatory practices extending over 15 years and affecting multiple families. Cross started to stand. Your Honor. Sit down, Mr. Cross. I'm not finished. He sat. This court will not reward such conduct. I am granting conditional guardianship of Emma Pierce to Nathan Pierce, effective immediately. The courtroom erupted. Emma threw her arms around me. George was grinning. Caldwell actually smiled. Judge Morrison banged her gavel. Conditions are as follows. Nathan obtains his GED within 6 months. Property brought to minimum code compliance within 1 year. Emma enrolled in approved homeschool program with monthly progress reports. Quarterly check-ins with DHHS. Violation of any condition subjects guardianship to immediate review. Then she turned to Cross and her voice went cold as winter. Regarding Blackwood Development's intervention in this case, I find their motives suspect and their evidence inadequate. I am forwarding Mr. Caldwell's documentation to the Maine Attorney General's office for investigation into possible predatory acquisition practices, fraud, and extortion. Cross was on his feet. Your Honor, I am issuing a permanent injunction against Blackwood Development from any further action related to the Pierce property, including contact surveillance or legal filings, except through proper real estate channels. If Blackwood wishes to purchase this land, they may make a fair market offer through a licensed broker. But the campaign of pressure ends today. She banged the gavel one final time. This case is closed. Outside the courthouse in the February sunshine that felt like spring, even though it was still winter, we stood in a knot of people who'd become family. George clapping my back, Mary crying happy tears, Pastor Jameson saying a prayer of thanks, Doc Morrison shaking my hand with his old steady grip. Sarah Davies approached last. I'll see you in 3 months for the first check-in. I expect to see progress. Then softer, but I think you'll be fine. Vincent Cross came out of the courthouse alone. His associates had already left. He stood there for a moment looking at me across the courthouse steps. Then he walked over. I tensed, expecting one final attack. Instead, he extended his hand. I stared at it, confused. You won, he said quietly. Congratulations. It's over, I asked. For now. He paused and something in his eyes was different. Respect maybe, or resignation. Blackwood is a $200 million corporation. We don't give up easily, but maybe you deserve this place more than we do. Why the change, I asked. He looked away out at the snow-covered valley. My father died in coal mines fighting for scraps. Your grandmother died fighting for her home. I used to think my father was a fool, that he should have left, found easier work, valued his life over his pride. He looked back at me. But watching you these last 3 months, I realized something. Maybe that kind of fighting matters more than profit margins. Maybe there are things worth dying for. He dropped his hand. I hadn't shaken it. Good luck, son. You're going to need it. He walked to his Mercedes and drove away. I never saw Vincent Cross again. 2 years later, the Attorney General's investigation found fraud in 8 Maine counties. Blackwood paid $12 million in settlements to families they'd targeted. The company moved their resort project to New Hampshire and left Northwood alone. But that day, standing on the courthouse steps with Emma's hand in mine, all I knew was that we'd won. We'd fought impossible odds and won. The months that followed were hard work, but they were joyful work. George and other men from town helped repair the roof properly. Doc Morrison's son, who was an electrician, wired 2 rooms as donated labor. The fuel assistance program paid for a new well pump. I studied for my GED every night by firelight and lamplight. Took the test in May, passed with high scores. Emma thrived in her homeschool program. Her teacher came weekly and reported that Emma was reading 2 grades above level. In June, we planted a garden, Emma's project. Tomatoes, beans, lettuce, carrots. She tended it every day, reading gardening books, learning about soil and seasons. In August, we finished Emma's bedroom, painted the walls light blue, her choice, found a bed frame at an estate sale, built shelves for her books and drawings. She made a sign for her door, my room. This is my room in my house, she said, and the pride in her voice made everything worth it. Sarah's quarterly check-ins became friendly visits. In August, she recommended removing all conditions. Full guardianship, no supervision. The judge approved. I started at Northern Maine Community College in September, studying forestry management. Learned about sustainable logging, land conservation, the history of Maine forests. Learned that my grandfather had run a small logging operation on this very land using practices that were ahead of their time. Started to see that this wasn't just about saving a house. It was about preserving a way of life, a connection to the land that corporate development wanted to erase. Emma made friends in town. Started going to church youth group. Was happy in a way I'd never seen her before. The house became a home. Not perfect. Still needed work. But solid, warm, ours. On November 15th, 1983, my 19th birthday, we had a small party. George Caldwell, Sarah Pastor Jameson, Doc Morrison, Mary. Emma baked a cake with help from Mary, lopsided and too sweet, but made with love. Caldwell presented me with final paperwork, full guardianship, all conditions removed, legal and permanent. You did it, Nathan, he said. You kept your promise. That evening, after everyone left, Emma and I stood on the ridge behind the house, the same place I'd stood a year earlier, deciding whether to stay or run. Are you glad you stayed? Emma asked. I looked out at the valley, at the trees turning colors in the fading light, at our house with smoke rising from the chimney. Every day, I said, even the hard ones. Me too. We stood there in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. A year ago, I'd been a scared kid with no home and no hope. Now I was a man with a sister, a house of future. The winter had tested us, but it had also made us. Made me understand that strength isn't about never being afraid. It's about doing what needs to be done even when you're terrified. Home isn't something you're given. It's something you build, with bleeding hands and stubborn will and love that refuses to quit. My grandmother had taught me that, not with words, but with the choice she left me, the impossible choice that turned out to be the only choice worth making. I finish the story and look at Michael. He's quiet for a long time, turning the iron key over in his hands. So that's how you got this place, he says finally. That's how. Not through luck, through choice, and you lived here ever since. Emma lived here until college, became a teacher in Portland. Your grandmother, she married, had 2 kids. One of them is your mother. I point to a photograph on my desk. Me at 25, Sarah Davies at 33, Emma at 17. Our wedding photo. Sarah and I stayed friends after the case, fell in love, got married, had 3 children in this house. She died 5 years ago. Cancer. The pain of that loss is still fresh, but it's a clean pain. The pain of loving someone fully and losing them to time, not to abandonment or betrayal. Emma and I expanded the house, added a wing, modernized it, but we kept the original structure. The root cellar is still there, preserved like a museum. Your grandmother, Emma, says her best childhood memories are from that cellar. Michael shakes his head in wonder. And all because you chose to stay. All because I chose to fight. I lean forward. Michael, you told me you were thinking about dropping out of school, that it's too hard, that nobody understands you. He nods, looking uncomfortable. Let me tell you something. When I was 18, I had no GED, no prospects, living in a freezing cellar with a 10-year-old who depended on me for everything. I could have blamed the system, blamed Blackwood, blamed my dead parents and absent grandmother. Instead, I studied by firelight because I'd promised Emma I'd build us a home. You're 17. You have heat, food, family opportunities I never dreamed of. Don't waste them because things are hard. Everything worth having is hard. I pick up the key, hold it out to him. Your great-grandmother died fighting for this land. I nearly froze fighting to keep it. Your grandmother, Emma, worked 2 jobs to help me afford college. This isn't just a house. It's a testament to people who refuse to quit. You come from that line. Act like it. Michael takes the key, and I see something shift in his face. Understanding, maybe. Or the beginning of it. Yes, sir, he says quietly. I walk him out to his car. Snow is falling lightly. December 2024, gentle and soft. Grandpa, he says before getting in, if you could go back, talk to 18-year-old you, what would you say? I think about that boy standing in the snow with a choice to make, scared and angry, and certain he'd fail. I'd tell him the winter will be worse than you imagine, but so will your strength. You'll cry, you'll want to quit, you'll doubt every choice, but Emma will believe in you, even when you don't believe in yourself. And 42 years later, you'll stand in that same house, restored and warm and full of family, and you'll know every frozen night was worth it. Every bleeding hand was worth it. Every moment of fear was worth it, because you built something that lasts. Michael nods slowly, drives away. I stand in the snow, watching his taillights disappear, then turn back to the house. Lights warm in the windows. Smoke rising from the chimney. Same house, but transformed. I walk to the old root cellar, preserved now behind glass. The stone walls still stand. The dirt floor remains. On the shelf sits the ammo box, opened and preserved. Inside, my grandmother's letters. The original $10,000 framed. Photos of young Nathan and Emma. I touch the box gently. Thank you, Grandma, for the choice, for the test, for teaching me that home isn't given. It's made, it's chosen, it's fought for. I close the cellar door and walk back to the house, go inside to warmth and light, and I think about that winter, the winter that made my family, the winter that proved me right, not because we survived it, but because we chose it. We chose the impossible path, and it led us home.